Thank you once again for being back here with us. We very much appreciate it. So last time we provided you with a lot of information about our work, information about various ways that cities and counties have made decision-making more equitable. Tonight, you'll have an opportunity to explore some of those ideas and ideas of your own, talk about what you love and hate, anticipate challenges, and hear from us about what resources and support might be available to you. So let's take care of some housekeeping and get to it. Our team members are here again, but you met them last time, so we'll skip the introductions. If anybody's wondering who somebody is, just let me know. Couple of details. If you are a member of the public or the press, first of all, welcome. Secondly, we'd love to know who you are. So if you haven't done it already, please put your name and your affiliation in your name label. And we're asking that all observers turn your video off. That way the elected officials whose cameras are on will show up on the screen and they can feel as if they're actually in a meeting with each other. And please keep yourself muted, of course, when you're not speaking. And don't worry, if you forget to turn off your camera or your mic, we'll do it for you. We have a few sort of working agreements we just want to run through to make this deliberation process as smooth as possible. First of all, listen really carefully to what other people are saying to make sure you understand. Share the time so everyone has an opportunity to participate. Disagree with curiosity rather than with frustration or hostility. And then lastly, we will not have an official break, so please feel free to get up and go do what you need to do to take care of your own comfort. Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Liz.
Yeah, hi. Welcome and thanks everybody again for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us tonight. So really, I think Jill sent you in an email sort of the purpose of the evening, but it's really just to give you time and space to have a deliberative conversation without having to make formal decisions. So CJAM is all about creating that kind of space for effective conversation. You'll have the opportunity to go a little bit deeper to consider benefits, opportunities, and challenges of sort of the three options that we presented 2 weeks ago. And you'll also have the opportunity to think about ways that you might want to move forward. And then also too, if there are things that you might need from Community Voices for Health project in terms of support or kind of guidance towards resources, that there'll be an opportunity for you to develop those also. Then the thing that we wanted to make sure that we kind of shared with you sort of a summary of what kind of feedback you all gave us after the last session. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oops. Okay, does everybody see my screen? Yes. Okay, so we heard, and I kind of group these sort of just by sort of topic areas, but we heard a lot of you talked about how do we really build trust? And it was between you all and the community, and especially with underrepresented groups that we may not have as much interaction with, but also many of you mentioned how do we build trust between city to city elected officials, county and city elected officials, and then county to county folks. So trust was a really big issue that was brought up early, and it's incredibly important when you think about elements of effective public engagement. So it was a great concept to tee up. And a lot of you talked about how do we reach underrepresented groups? What does it take to be successful? How do we have better coordination and cross-sector collaboration? How do we keep, this was more going a little bit deeper. So some of you posed the question, how do we keep the principles and practices of public participation alive after a statute or an ordinance might be passed? Governments pass ordinances that are easy to ignore. How do we get buy-in across all departments? That was sort of related to health and all policies. Someone wondered, how do we solve health and all policy issues when there is a great divide on suggested solutions? How do other communities fund and allocate resources to support health and all policies? Some of you talked about managing the impacts of state politics and statutes that are passed at the state level that you have little, or you have the feeling that you have little control over. How can we build better community understanding of how local government works? Some of you talked about those challenges as an elected official. And I thought this was a great point to bring up. How do we tell our stories of what's working? And some of the things that were suggested were dashboards. How can we use technology more effectively to do that? Social media. And then a couple of people wondered what sort of roles media can play in really helping to educate and illuminate sort of the key concerns and issues that are facing our community. We also asked you, what more would you like to know? And several of you said, thanks so much for the wonderful resources, but we'd like a little bit more annotation on the resource list. So we're going to do that for you. And in addition, as you think about resources and where you might want to, spend some time in your small groups and you identify something that we could really help, we can also provide more guidance in terms of providing just really good resources for you. Someone mentioned that they wanted to have a better understanding of all the stakeholders and contributors that will be involved in Community Voices for Health Monroe County. And someone said they're really looking forward to hearing about the recommendations coming from our advisory council and then how we might begin to work together to improve health in our community. And so I wanted to go ahead and give you a quick update. And this sort of demonstrates some of the elements of what we're here to talk about today. But in terms of the next steps that our advisory council is going to be doing in terms of identifying solution areas and again, working more effectively within the community, is that we are going to be partnering with the Monroe County Health Department, IU Health, City of Bloomington Parks and Rec, to create the next Monroe County Community Health Improvement Plan. That's something that happens every 3 to 5 years in our community. IU Health just finished, they just published the 2021 Community Health Needs Assessment. And so we're going to be looking as a community in the months of sort of April through June of this year. We're going to be diving deeper into the data that was surfaced in the Community Health Needs Assessment, along with mirroring the feedback and data and information that we've been hearing for folks in the community. We really want to increase participation of this process because this is not the health department's plan. This is our Monroe County Health Improvement Plan that should be owned by all of us. And we're really excited because I think it could really help us all as a community understand health challenges, the strengths, the datas, and the stories more effectively. Some of our goals that would be moving us to create more of a shared vision of health and collective ownership of the solutions. So it's not just up to one group to make those decisions. And we're hopeful that we'll, through more robust participation in this process, that we'll, surface some maybe really creative ideas for solving some of these issues that we grapple with and have been facing for years and years. And we really hope that this is an opportunity for all of you to think about being an active participant in this process. And so you'll hear more about that coming up in the future. So with that, I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to introduce, this is Lucia, and she's going to go ahead. Lucia is a member of our steering committee, and she is going to talk to you a little bit. She's going to provide a recap of the 3 scenarios that we provided at the February 7th meeting. And Lucia is a professor in the IU School of Public Health. So Lucia.
Thank you very much. Yes. And because I kind of do this for a living, it falls on me on making a very brief recap of what these three interrelated approaches to community engagement are. Before I start fully on that, and I'm going to share my screen while I talk, I do want to point out that the thing that sort of unites these three interrelated approaches to the Community Voices for Health Monroe County project is this understanding that if you have more people and more people from a diverse background engaging in public discussions and engaging in making decisions about policy, you have better policies that affect or can affect health in ways that that improve health for communities. And so that is sort of the underlying idea behind these three approaches and behind and what these three approaches sort of unite with Community Voices for Health. So the three approaches, and I'm going to sort of, they're not in the same order as they are in the agenda, because for me, these are interrelated, and you can actually, as I see them as a whole, you can sort of put them together and take parts of some and sort of think about them as complementary, and also you can think about them as single approaches. So the first approach that we sort of introduced last time was this idea of principles for public engagement. And so basically, public engagement is any process that engages the public in decision-making. However, not all decision-making engagement is the same, right? And so the principles for public engagement is a framework that allows us to think through what makes good, effective public engagement. And these are some of the principles that are in the binders that you received, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to mention that the idea is that if you want public engagement in policy and decision-making to be effective and to be fruitful, it needs to be a public engagement that is purposeful, that has a central goal, that is informed on both sides, on the sides of the public and the sides of the policymakers, that is authentic, that you really want public engagement and not that public engagement is sort of like this box that you need to check, that it be transparent, especially transparent in how feedback gets incorporated into whatever decisions are made, that is equitable, and that means that anybody who wants a seat at the table can get a seat at the table, and that people who are marginalized from the table also need to get not only a seat at the table, but able to voice their opinions in this table. And this sort of goes together with inclusive, which sort of crosses over. It needs to be effective, so there needs to be some sort of monitoring and thought process and going back to this public engagement, and it needs to be relationship driven. So something that is not a one-off, but something that is leading to a more of an engagement in a relationship. The center of the idea of these principles for public engagement is that public engagement is not a one-time thing, that it is a process. And that this process is a process that has different steps, and I have the steps there. So you assess readiness, you define scope, you identify goals, you identify and get to know stakeholders, you determine the level of engagement, you select the tools that will facilitate that engagement. But this is not where it ends, right? So you have participation in a specific policy discussion, and then you go back, and it's an ongoing process that is refined and builds relationships over time. In a similar format, we also talked about comprehensive plans, and I've just copied and pasted this from one of our PDFs in that binder. But basically, the idea behind thinking about public engagement and health in comprehensive plans runs through the need for creating plans with public engagement, feedback, or discussions. And so this means that when thinking about comprehensive plans, and in this case, this is a framework for intervention and for health in, I forget which place, I think maybe Tacoma, you need to have different forms of community input in different ways, in different parts of the plan that will serve the overall plan to move forward. And so when you're thinking about comprehensive plans and thinking about putting public engagement in health, it needs to be something that is part of the plan and not just something that you do once. And so again, this speaks to engagement as process, and also to the idea that plans are also processes, right? They are ideals. We try to get them to do them, but sometimes they don't work, and we need to sort of retool and go back. And so in this process, we need to think about how we incorporate the feedback from community stakeholders. And finally, we talked about health in all policies. And health in all policies is based largely, or the idea is based largely on two central tenets. And one is that humans have a right to health, or put in another way, health is a human right. And if we think about health as a human right, then, and we think about the other tenet, which is that there are non-health issues that affect the health of people's bodies, which are the social determinants of health, then we see that to be able to achieve health as a human right, we need to think about these dimensions of health in a much broader perspective. And so I like these kinds of graphs, and I use them when I talk about these things with my students, because they feel like sort of interconnected wombs in a way, right? And I do a lot of research on birth and birth care. And so for me, this is something that makes sense. But if you see at the center of this, of the whole picture, you have individuals and individual bodies. The social determinants of health framework basically says that these individual bodies and the things that happen to these individual bodies do not exist in isolation from what happens in society. Because the decisions that are made about what taxes are being passed, what nutrition laws are on the books, what fertilizers are available for crops, these decisions affect the bodies that we live in and affect the communities where those bodies live. And in doing that, we see that age, sex, and these hereditary factors that we look at individually are really very dependent on the things that happen in the broader perspective. So in agriculture and food production, in education, in the work environment, in living and working conditions, things that have to do with employment, in sanitation. And so what this means is that when we are thinking about health, we need to think about health as a perspective of all the policies, right? It's a part of all the policies. And so this sort of the idea of trying to deconstruct the notion that when we're thinking about health, it's only about, for example, the county health department. When we, in reality, anything that we make decisions on correlates for the community where we live, and therefore for the bodies that live in those communities. And because the health in all policies is sort of undergirded by this idea of health as a human right, the search for health equity and for an equitable access to health also is part of the health in all policies framework, where we need to think, okay, to make this an equitable policy decision-making process, who needs to engage? within these health and all policies discussions, and who has not engaged in the past, who should engage now. And that's where sort of all of these things come together in terms of public engagement, in terms of policy discussion and others. And that's all I have, but I will, we have a couple of minutes, so I will ask Liz if she wants to do something else.
Thank you so much, Lucia. That was fantastic. So we're now going to split into breakout rooms based on your jurisdiction. So if you'll give me just a minute, I will send you off.
Recording in
Taking notes
progress.
and make sure that all is in order and we remember what you say. So thank you, Stephanie, and feel free, Stephanie, to jump in and help me out if I need help. I'm facilitating this group. Lisa Marie Napoli, who's a much better facilitator than I am, facilitating the other group. And we obviously have two bodies here. We have a commission and a council, and but same county. So you're together here tonight, of course. That's sort of the story. So process-wise, let me just move my notes over here. As you know from the last meeting and from the recap earlier, that Lucia did, and Liz as well, really, there's some hypothetical approaches or pieces of work or frameworks or ideas were put on the table that might move this notion or these notions, these integrated elements of health, of voice and health forward. And those that have been talked about include health chapters or elements or content and comprehensive plans, public engagement principles, effective practices, or health and all policies. Now, what we're going to do process-wise is just take one at a time, and for no particular order, as is suggested somewhere online by somebody, we'll take health and all policies first. And again, we're not selling you anything, meaning CVHMC. This is an opportunity for you to talk with one another. That's the idea of this time together. And I figure we'll take, as it's needed, about 10 minutes on each one of these three items. We have a couple follow-up questions that I will ask, and Lisa Marie will be asking in her group, and then we're all back together to do what can be done all together. So we're basically, for the health and all, we'll take health and all policies first. Any questions about process? Facilitators should always ask that. And if I didn't say, by the way, thank you for being here. As a resident, I'd like to say a personal thank you for your really, truly, as heartfelt, honest as I can possibly be. Thank you for your time on this. So anyway, so are there any questions about what we're doing here? Anything you want to know before I go any farther? Okay, well, thank you again. Thanks, Megan. So we'll take a look at health and all policies, and we've got a couple questions. Is that a hand? There's good. I put another thing of process I didn't mention. This isn't like a push your button to raise your hand. You all know each other. I don't think you're going to get out of order, particularly. So if you want to talk, just go forward and talk. Too much process is sometimes, maybe not the best tool. If I need to process in some way, I will, but otherwise, open up and say who'd like to share a comment or thought. So just so you know what's going on. So anyway, health and all policies has been talked about a bit last week. Lucia talked about it a bit. We thought we'd take, based on what you know about this, and as you know, there are other documents that have been shared, including the selected resources for the development of local health and public engagement plans, policies, plans, practices, and policies. It was shared last time, I think, emailed to everybody. That has resources in it for all the things we're talking about tonight. Not exhaustive, not everything forever, but it has a bunch of resources. And we will soon add to that excerpts from Indiana local comprehensive plans throughout the state, city, county, and town, touching where there's language and content relating to public engagement or health in some way, shape, or form. Those will become added to this document. So that's out there for you. We thought we'd take each one of these items, health and all policies, health chapters or elements of comprehensive plans, and then public engagement principles and such, one at a time. So we'll take health and all policies. We'll first ask, well, just what's your first take? This isn't, we're not reaching decisions. No one's asking for decisions. But what's your first take and/or questions relating to health and all policies idea? And I saw, if it's helpful, I picked out of the Center for Disease Control. They said health and all policies is a collaborative approach that integrates and articulates health considerations into policymaking across sectors to improve the health of all communities and people. It also says HIAP approach may also be effective in identifying gaps in achieving health equity, and what we've been talking about. So first takes on that. Would anyone be a quick go around for anyone who wishes to say something about what do you think for the county? The idea of looking at health and all policies. And yes, go ahead. May I call you, shall I give you a title? How would you like to be addressed?
It's fine. My first name is fine. No worries. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. This is really exciting. I've worked on with this group, as Kate and Trent have as well, and this is really a great opportunity to have a good discussion. I read through a number of the models and the examples that we were provided before our last meeting, and I really like the idea of having this kind of a policy because it would serve as a guide for every decision that we make. But I don't want us to put a policy together that we can't follow, right? We don't want the pie in the sky, we want the reality. How do we actually implement it, right? And so I think it's important to, yes, think about the principles and what we all want to see and what the community wants to see, even more importantly, but we don't want it to just be principles and ideas that we can actually implement. So that would be my concern on that.
Thank you. Well, we're just going to go around first on the health and all policies idea, and then we'll take the other two after that. Other thoughts on the health and all policies idea? Questions, comments, thoughts? Trent, if I may call you by your first name.
Please don't call me anything else if whatever works. First of all, I appreciate this very much. And the comment I would make is, I think that I love the notion of health and all policies that prioritize health in every consideration. Mm-hmm. The worry I always have is the same worry I have with most things, is in the eye of the subjective beholder. I'd say if you polled every person that had our seats for the last 100 years or so, I'd say an overwhelming majority thought that they were doing that. And so I always, the thing I think that is always our challenge is to make sure in that subjectivity of, what works for one person and what is consistently the same thing for the next person, how we define that we have done the health and all policy, or is it a somewhat health and we feel good about it kind of policy? I think that's a tough question. And look, we all know, and everyone at CJAM knows that there can be two sides to every single policy. But again, the challenge I always throw out to all of us is, who's looking at it, how is that viewed, and how do we make sure that we're really getting a policy that does reflect where people are at? Even people that I would just add, they can't tune in and don't have the time or convenience and are essentially paying us to do those things. How do you make sure on those levels?
Thank you, Trent. Anyone else like to come in on this question of so the first take on the health and all policies idea?
I'll jump in. And I really think this is a great approach all around. And this is you said first take. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna tell you from kind of the gut where my reaction, rather than my contemplation. As someone whose background is in environmentalism, I've always wondered why we can't use that as a lens for all policy and sustainability and environmental health. Not the public health community, but ecology as as in all policy, and that type of approach. So anytime there's another competing cause, I'm like, oh, but don't forget about sustainability. Don't forget about that. So I love public health. I was in the School of Public Health for a time, and that sort of won me over to looking at things from that lens and seeing how these things are not at odds at all, and they are very compatible. But I do sometimes worry when we talk about an approach, it's the discussion sort of begins to exclude these other concepts. That's all.
Yeah, that's good. Very thoughtful. Very good. Thank you very much. Peter, if I may, again, call you by the
Yeah, please. That's fine. So like Kate, I come from the School of Public Health and I'm still there. So I really appreciate this approach. I work in this field. I understand the field, and it's wonderful. This is great. My concern, and again, this is a gut reaction, I haven't crunched the numbers, is how on earth are we going to pay for all this? I'm looking at the graphic from astho.org that Professor Reyes just shared. And it's got things on there like green sustainable development, affordable housing, police, justice system, jails. I mean, it's just millions and tens of millions of dollars that, if we hadn't had, certain federal programs, we wouldn't have done very well throughout this pandemic. And we're seeing a lot of state overreach over local control that's happening more and more. And, there was just a bill in the House, legislature that was trying to restrict local dollars. And it's just a concern. I mean, I would love to invest in all these things, but where are the dollars going to come from?
And thank you. I would say, if I may, I'm trying to be quiet mostly. I think the health and all policies approach is less a do more things than to do planning a certain way with many things taken into account. So I think there is a distinction here between doing more and an understanding of how do we do our planning for things that relate to health and the integration related elements of looking at many things sometimes at once rather than separating them and not seeing connections. Now I say that with caution because you know more than me about county government and expenditures and such, but generally.
Well, Terry, I doubt that, but 5 of us are here that only have fiscal powers. We don't have executive powers. We don't have legislative powers. So yeah.
I know. I understand. That's why it's interesting to have both bodies in the same room. But it's also very helpful, actually. Anyway, one more comment, perhaps, on just first question, and then we'll go to the next question. But still within health and all policies. But one more comment, perhaps. Yes.
I think that there are things that we do that do benefit the environment, sustainability, health. I think about the brine system that we're trying to put in the county. Putting that in should reduce accidents, which is part of health, right? Putting that in should be better for the environment. But we don't think about it in terms of the health and all policy. We don't articulate it that way. So I think there are a lot of things that we already do, including like the Sophia Travis grants, the money that we give regularly every year to Health Net Bloomington, even to, we have a clinic through the health department. We have all kinds of things. We just don't stop and think about it in that kind of umbrella term.
Well, let me ask you one more question. I'm watching our time as well. So that's my job, is to kind of watch our time to get through the 3 questions and such. But staying one last time, perhaps, with the health and all policies, and not talking about, okay, exactly what we do to get there, which is beyond the scope of our time together. But kind of stuff, that's the academic word stuff. What kind of stuff has to be thought about for a county to even thinking about adopting a health and all policies approach? Challenges, opportunities is what's the little next level between the first take into the little deeper contemplation about the idea. What's the next set of stuff? God help me. The next set of items, ways to think about the work that might be relevant. for our county to think about health and all policies. And I will mention that in that document that I waved around before, the selected resources, et cetera, there is a thing in there which I'm familiar with the document, but not its content. A guidance document for models for developing local health and all policies put together by the Public Health Association, the Public Health Institute, and others, which looked pretty good when I looked at it earlier briefly, but I can't speak to detail. But what would it take, generally speaking, to go forward with this kind of thing in Monroe County? To adopt sort of a health and all policies, kind of a planning, policymaking framework, if you will, a way to think about these kind of things. Or rephrase the question as you wish. Yeah.
I was going to say, I hate to jump in again because I don't want to dominate the conversation, but it seems to me that this kind of a thing follows a good comprehensive plan, which I think we do need. And I think the folks here were interested in talking about that as well. And I know that's on our docket. So I don't want to trample on your agenda. But I think when you have that kind of a document, that if the community wants to see that kind of review, I look at it as sort of a lens. You look at everything you do through the lens of health for all. And does this meet? And my concern is always, well, who makes that decision, and what's the subjective criteria that we have to follow, and will the people be happy with that? But I feel like a comprehensive plan is a good first step, because it is the opportunity to work with the public to figure out what it is that is most important, and a health and all plan can begin small and expand. If that's what the interest is. If the interest is solely on transportation, then that's where we could start. And it doesn't have to be done all at once.
It can't be.
True words. Who else? Anyone who hasn't spoken would like to jump in? I'd like to hear from everyone if you wish.
So I want to follow on what Julie just said. It doesn't have to be all at once. We have to envision what we can actually accomplish and be able to discuss that and communicate that to the public. We don't want to present to them something that is pie in the sky and not possible. And this is a concern of mine because of the gulf that separates many people in the public from their local government. And I think we always have to be very careful when we get into these in-depth studies that should guide our decision-making, that we be realistic as to what we can accomplish. I don't mean look at the budget and say, oh, we can only do this. That's not what I mean at all. I just mean be realistic and not raise people's expectations beyond what we might actually be able to provide.
Thank you. Other comments on relating to this health and all policies? I'm just scanning, make sure I didn't miss anybody.
Well, I'm really late to the meeting, and I may have missed earlier discussion about this, but one of the activities that the county is working on now is criminal justice reform. And that probably 80% has to do with health issues. And I think if we just can look at that attempt through that lens, we can probably come up with something pretty good.
Thank you for that. That I think significant, I think. Look, well, thank you. Let's move on. The next item on our agenda here that we put together is looking at comprehensive plans, which someone was kind enough to prompt back there a couple minutes ago. Thank you. So one of the things we've looked at, and we've even put, when I mean this, Community Voice for Health, Monroe County, we put together materials and look, Robert Wood Johnson funds 5 or 6 of these projects. We see what other people are doing. We see what other materials people have, and we put them all together. And Stephanie's done a lot of research as well in this on behalf of Gnarly Tree as a partner with CVHMC, and look at what materials and documents and experiences and examples are around. And we've looked at begun to collect comprehensive plans. And one of the things is looking at those places that have developed more concrete kind of focused health chapters, elements, content, different language, different places, of course. One state's comprehensive plans may not be another's. One areas of the state's comprehensive plan may not be another's, so everybody's different. But one of the ideas here was this notion of every comprehensive plan almost, it seems to me, has some elements of health in it, city or county or town. Whether you want to talk health up front, we want to talk about pedestrian walkway, food, transportation, bicycles, parks and recs. I mean, this is all, if you talk health and social determinants of health, you get a lot. Fewer places have focused this in a certain content area of a comprehensive plan and looked at health. But so this was one of the areas that came up. And so in the last meeting that we had, this was talked about a bit. So I'm done talking about that. This is set up for this part of our meeting tonight is the same process that we just did. I was going to ask for anyone's first take on health and comprehensive plans. Now, obviously, you have a comprehensive plan. I was actually pulled it out and looked at it earlier again. And by the way, because I can't help myself if I can find it quickly, it's the only comprehensive plan I know of, and I'm not even finding it right now, that has Aristotle and John Rockefeller quoted at the beginning of it on the front page. So, that's... And I've actually used those quotes themselves in my class because they're interesting language, actually, and useful, but that's another matter. But anyway, within you have a comprehensive plan. The county has a comprehensive plan. And I've been through it. I know you have, and looked at, well, here's this and that and the other thing. It doesn't call out health in one place. Any thoughts about comprehensive plans in health? Comprehensive comprehensive plans themselves are living documents. They're guidance documents. They beget other documents, and other documents beget them as well, of course. But this thought about comprehensive plans and health, things that might be done, things that you think might be useful to do, things that might move forward or something new for the county. First take comments, one way or another, up or down or sideways. And if I'm not being clear, please tell me.
Who was around for the last comprehensive plan? Julie or Lee, were you in the council? Cheryl, were you around?
No.
I mean, on the county government.
You were around.
Well, I was born.
Were you born?
Well,
let me take my foot out of my mouth.
I was actually on the plan commission at that time, but it was before I'd been elected to the council.
I don't think I've read our comprehensive plan, I'm sorry to say.
Well, it's a very good one.
It's a good one.
But what had occurred to me when you asked this question, and something like a comprehensive plan takes quite a few different people to pass. And this is just one person's idea, and a lot of others might think it's crazy. But one of the things that we really need in this community is supportive housing. And that would be both for people who are homeless and in particular, people who are coming out of jail. So frequently, people who are coming out of jail have no place to go and they end up homeless. And I was hearing the other day in a Stride meeting that the homeless are almost 1-to-1 addicted to meth. And that is a major health problem. And I think we need to make sure that people coming out of jail or out of prison have supportive housing to go to.
Thank you very much. That's, again, a very important arena. Other thoughts on just comprehensive plans? I was looking at the table of contents of the, under the vision section, and the sections of vision are economic development, residential development, transportation infrastructure, environmental conservation and natural resource, and intergovernmental cooperation. And then, of course, there's under existing conditions, that's goes a long way. And, you know.
Carrie, we have a raised hand from Trent Deckard.
Say again?
We have a raised hand from Trent.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Trent, raised hand. I see it now.
It sounded more official than it really is. The only thing I was going to say is, you know, I do always like the notion of thinking about what we do in our meetings, what comprehensive plans do. Sometimes I worry, though, that even at those levels, you know, that folks don't read a plan, or that things only a developer reads it, or et cetera. And you know, one thing that I think gets lost in the shuffle is the day-to-day operations and even the bureaucracy of both county and city government, or any government. I mean, it could be federal. And I sometimes wonder if there is not more ounce of cure in health and all policies in having our departments who are brilliant at being creative and innovative. And I'm speaking out my power level here, so I'm just throwing something out. But having them look at, you know, health and all in their day-to-day operations. So for instance, if the jail has a thing they're doing, are they looking, and I'm sure they are because they deal with mental health care, et cetera. But are they looking at that? Is highway looking at it when they maybe choose a placement of something, you know, often placement to treatment, and et cetera. You know, all those things come in, and I think our departments are pretty creative about seeing those. But is there anything that we can do to encourage, you know, on your day-to-day operation, what does this look like? I'll never forget the BMV relocation out to Curry Pike, where the bus lines didn't quite match up. And the State Department of Administration was like, look, we didn't do it on purpose. And they didn't, I'm sure. But at the same time, that is a small thing where health and all could have truly factored into there a little bit differently. So kind of unleashing that the power administratively for folks on the ground in these departments, maybe to see opportunities here.
Thank you, Trent. I'm sorry for missing your raised hand there.
Yeah, I think Trent's spot on there about getting our departments involved. I think that would be really important. But just so you all understand how we use a comprehensive plan and planning, it's very different than I think it would be for health. The comprehensive plan and planning is a set of principles that bridge you to your next set of actual ordinances when you're writing the next set of ordinances, which we're doing the CDO right now. And so you're supposed to go back and look at those principles as you look at new development proposals. Does the new development proposal, it might meet today's legal code, but does it meet the principles we established for the future? And so we review developments for whether or not it meets the comprehensive plan. And we have a special committee that does it. So there's a role for it, and it's not sitting on a dusty shelf, which is good. But yes, we want to avoid that for sure. And I do agree. And I think there are ways that potentially you know, our departments can be involved in public engagement in a way that they typically aren't, that would bring the community input into creating some ideas and concepts and moving those forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Another question, another comment, if there's one to anyone who hasn't spoken, especially, I'd invite you to participate.
Sorry, that would be me. I'm just listening in as much as I can during this because I'm the new person and I'm still trying to get acclimated to a lot of different things here. So just taking it all in. It's not that I'm not wanting to participate at all, but I'm definitely listening to a very healthy and important conversation here. But when we think about health and all policies as well, I'll just add to this too. I know we talked about those that are experiencing homelessness and those that are in our criminal justice system. I think health and all policies and in regards to housing too, to me personally, I think that means also affordable housing as well. So that's definitely something that's near and dear because, you know, we have people that are here, but we definitely want to make sure that we have housing that's equitable and for all as well too. So affordable housing is one that I would think of too.
Okay. Thank you very, very, very much. Other comments on comprehensive plans and health?
I apologize for just coming in right now. I've had a doctor's appointment that I just got out of, so
welcome.
I don't know exactly where the conversation is going, but I eagerly listen to the rest.
Steph was participating in our health system as we're talking about our health. It's all connected.
We're looking through across. First, we looked at health and all policies as an avenue, a potential hypothetical arena of activity. And then we looked at comprehensive plans and health. And we're going to go around of any comments on that. And then we'll move to the final item before we talk more generally about the three and then go back in the large group session.
And as we think about like bringing in departments, which I think is a really great idea also, I hope that we would bring in groups like the Area 10 Agency on Aging, which does the rural transit, because transportation is one of those keys that we have to worry about too, especially when we know that there are so many rides that they're not able to offer, you know, the calls that they get. And so I think that that piece needs to be addressed also.
That sounds like an essential element of good engagement as well, of course. And that's good. So, well, let's move I'm watching my clock as well. And the third element is this notion of this hypothetical approaches goes to public engagement principles or effective practices, depending on which way you go. And earlier, we talked a little bit about that this evening. But this public engagement idea, they'd come up, the information that's been shared with you at the last meeting, you know, this initiative has been able to pull together a range of information around the country, both guidance documents as well as actual city, county public engagement principles, as well as some communities that put together their own guidance documents to help them how they think about doing their public engagement work, to be sort of a framework for how it's done and sort of a framework for even evaluation of such things. So we're just turning for a minute to public engagement itself a little bit, particularly as it relates to health, but as it broader too, because this is where it kind of crosses a lot of boundaries, no matter what the issue a little bit. And the first question is the same we've done before. First takes is just, if you think about for the county and what might be accomplished, if there was something to be accomplished, it would be useful to do or not, your decisions, about looking at public engagement principles, say, the county looking at perhaps adopting or considering the adoption of a set of public engagement principles. That's maybe one simplified way to look at it. Other places do it, obviously, you know, I collect them actually. But first take on this idea of just public engagement itself. Now, we're obviously mostly in this project thinking about health, but public engagement's a larger framework that allows health and other engagement, other issue engagement to go forward. But thoughts, any first take thoughts on this notion of public engagement principles or sort of codified effective practices for a county? Any first thoughts that you might have? And I see two hands. And Jeff, I'm using first names lest someone tells me not to at this point. So Jeff, I see your hand, and Peter, I see your hand. So go in that order for now.
So I guess my immediate thought is that principles on is that efforts towards encouraging public engagement also have to be accompanied by education on processes and lines of responsibility. I mean, that's, you know, we members of the public hate this. I know they hate the idea that we all have our own little well-defined responsibilities and that a lot of stuff we might want to do is totally outside of our powers. Public doesn't like to hear that, but of course we all work in, you know, we work in structures that are set up by law and are often complicated and consists of a lot of interactions between different bodies and people with different responsibilities. Yep. And I think that is a real challenge for public engagement, is to make sure that it's coupled with understanding of how, you know, where the lines of responsibility are drawn and what we can do and what we can't do, and what we can do at certain particular points in the policy development process and what we can't do. So I'm not sure where that leads you. I just think that
the lead is sharing your information. This is the first thing, is just tell us what's in your mind. So I think it was Peter, I think, is the next time.
Yeah. So as I've been thinking about this since our last time together, my thoughts tend to come back towards our boards and commissions. You know, as we talked about equity and inclusion, those are great opportunities for members of the public to sit down with us to say, well, okay, the policy is going in the wrong direction, do this instead. And it is so hard to get people to sit on these boards. We really struggle with it. And part of it's going to what I think Jeff was talking about. And the other part of it is that government work is slow. And it's not always, you know, this grandiose, immediate change that's going to happen. It's slow and it's methodical. And I think that's something that we can probably improve on, is how do we better incorporate the public into these processes? Our boards and commissions set up in a way that facilitates that, or maybe that's something that we can work on.
That's a great point, I think. Who else got more to say on this question of public? Was that Kate? Was that a hand?
It was going to be, but Jen's got a hand up. Let her go first.
There is it.
Oh.
There it is, Jennifer. I see it.
So
there you are.
I think Peter just hit the nail on the head with boards and commissions, and definitely trying to find people to fill them. And we definitely want public engagement, right? But I think the biggest thing right now is how is that equally accessible? Are we have these meeting times? Like, yes, we do want, you know, community engagement and involvement, but we also have to look at, like, are we easily accessible, you know, with our days and our times, and what does that look like? You know, some people might not be able to meet a 5:30 meeting. Some people might not be able to meet a 10 a.m. meeting. So, like, having various ways where we have it, where we can have all areas and avenues and facets of you know, community involvement is definitely something that's big. But I think we have to look at our approach and how we want to have community engagement back with us as well.
Thank you. Kate, did you? Yes.
I'm just kind of building off of what Peter and Jen have said, and thinking about the idea that to really get input that from people that you don't, that aren't just the same people that participate in boards and commissions and showing up at the meetings at the regular old times, you have to make an effort to go where they are. And we've tried that sometimes, but sometimes I even feel that when it's so very formal, and our meetings are formal, and even our outreach is very formal, and that's not where real engagement, human engagement, takes place. And I wonder if sometimes we're trying to shoehorn results and input from people into something that's too structured. and where we might have more success if and I don't have the right idea, but I mean, if you're just sitting in a coffee shop, talking to folks as opposed to the meeting at the such and such location at this place, and here are your groups of tables for your charrettes or whatever we're doing. I don't know, just a thought.
Thank you. Other thoughts on this whole question of public engagement, principles or otherwise? Penny.
I think one of the things that we've seen throughout COVID is that using Zoom, we've had better public engagement at our meetings. And so one of the things that we are planning going forward is to have hybrid meetings so that we can continue to encourage people to be part of things. The commissioners have been holding office hours for several months now. And I've had one person show up, and it was somebody who could have called me on the phone really easily. So they just took that opportunity to, be able to see me as opposed to just talk on the phone. So it's hard to get the word out sometimes too about our availability, about our desire to get input from people, and even just hear their complaints at times. And I do mine one in the middle of the day and one after work. So, yeah.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Public engagement? Yes, Cheryl.
I wanted to mention that when there was the first discussion with community voices held in different parts of the county, I attended our local township area meeting, and I was very pleased that we had a good turnout. I was very unhappy that the people who came are the same old people who come to everything. And the people who we needed to hear from were not there, even though we tried locally with Facebook posts and that we sent out from our community association, and with emails to a community association email list, and the meeting was held in the evening. Just none of the people who we really wanted to talk to about this.
And I'm so tempting on my part to share my thinking. I won't. Other comments on?
Yes, and I'm sorry, I'm Lee Jones. I need to change that there.
Yes, I know who you are, though.
Sorry about that. What I wanted to say is that I think one of the problems, well, there are a couple problems that we run into with achieving public engagement. I think Jeff hit on one of them, in that people simply do not understand county government. They don't know who to go to about what problems, and it's just we don't seem accessible because no one really knows who they should be trying to get access to. And then the other thing I was going to say is that another part of our difficulty, and some of what causes us to be so formal all the time and everything, is the open door laws.
Yes.
And those laws are intended to keep government as transparent and accessible to the public as possible, but it does force on us a kind of formality that the public probably doesn't really understand.
Yeah. Let me interject, if I may, just informational piece. That in that document that I mentioned before, it keeps getting away from me here, I got too many documents. The selected resource for development of local health and public engagement related plans, practices, and policies that you have available to you does have, in addition to public engagement principles, and some guidance documents from other communities around the country who've created not only principles for themselves, a set of principles to guide they look, which is very helpful for, staff and everybody, public and everybody, but also some practical how-tos and how you measure. But there's an example in there of a community in New Hampshire that does me kind of interesting. This Portsmouth Listens, I think, is that a certain way, it's part of the rules of how they do their public meetings. And with in certain situations, they have a public dialogue element to a council meeting. Which is, I'm just saying, I'm not recommending anything. I'm saying that in that set of materials, there's some different kinds of resources and examples from other real places, as well as guidance documents. So that's all. And I will mention, I took the County Citizens Academy or Resident Academy, I forget what it's called now. And I took the city when I first moved here 9 years ago. So I figured I need to, now I'm here, I need to understand. And I learned a lot, but more about what agency offices did, not how to get engaged. And I don't know what the current status is, but I don't talk about it, nor expecting you to, but I appreciated the opportunity to participate in that. And it does a kind of engagement to get involved and go learn about county government. So anyway, that's random. Anyway, other comments though about public engagement before we begin to wrap up this part before going back to the whole group. Yes. Jeff.
If I may, sorry, I was just writing down a couple of things because I just forgot them. One of the biggest things that I also think, because I think Kate said something that made me, when she's talking about the formality of meetings and whatnot, I think a couple of things is like people are fatigued. Like with the pandemic, I think everybody is just so burnt out. We're all doing some type of running something, whether it's a campaign, running a household, jobs, kids running us crazy, whatever the case is. I think there's just, yes, all of these. I think these are, as my kid is yelling at me from across the room here. So I feel like there's a lot of fatigue that has happened that maybe when we think about, people that we should have in these community conversations that aren't coming, they're just fatigued from general life in general, that they just, they don't show up. Not like they don't want to, it's just that it's just one more thing that they have to add to their plate. And then the other thing that I think that goes in hand with fatigue is, what's the end game? I've heard so many different times from people that, we keep having community conversations, or we want to have these conversations. And, it's great. It's a good start to have these types of conversations, but what is the end game? Like, what is the result of having these? I think that's what we talked about earlier in the first part is, where are we at now? Where do you want to be? How do we get there? So if we incorporate all of those different things into these community types of engagement, and we tell people, we want to hear from you because ... And at the end of this is what we want, ... And you being here is going to help us get to these places. I think if we change our approach to those types of things, I think maybe that's just me being optimistic. I think we could have a little bit of a change, but it just lies up to us to figure out how we can change that and make those happen.
I have to say, anyone to get involved, there's always sort of a cost benefit analysis, quote unquote, that everybody makes to get involved in anything. And part of that, so what? The so what question is a pretty darn good question when you're evaluating public engagement or planning public engagement. And a good set of principles, this is my only offering on the speechifying part, good set of principles will help guide good practice. And authentic is one public engagement principle. And authentic gets to some of what I think Ms. Crosley is talking about, if I may. Anyway, so let me begin to get close. I'm sorry for that. I teach public engagement, and I sometimes cannot help myself. So I will say one other little thing though. Oh, I got two. No, I won't. I see a hand from Kate and a hand from Penny.
I just wanted to throw out there the totally random idea of maybe we go to existing events rather than just existing places where people might be. And I think we have to stop short of pop-up public meetings because that's hard to like notice ahead of time. But I'm just trying to think of how, like Cheryl said, they had the meeting in the local firehouse, and that's going out into the community, but it was the same people. So maybe we look for what people are already doing and go there and engage on their terms in their ways. Anyway, more of the same, but just felt like throwing that out there.
Thank you. And Penny, I saw your hand that I'm going to queue up the last question for you.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that I thought that when we were doing the community justice reform work with people, that we got a good turnout and we got a broad group of people coming out. But there was a lot of very, very good, I think, publicity that surrounded those meetings.
Well, let me, as we get nearer to getting back into there, I will soon be getting prompts from my colleagues about how many minutes we have left and seconds before we go back. I've been waiting and watching about due pretty soon, I think. Actually, Stephanie, if you're live, meaning can I hear you? How many minutes do we have left for this item? I'm thinking it's about 10 to 15.
Elsa would be a better source of that.
Okay, that's fine. Is she
Elsa?
on? Elsa?
Oh. Yes, I'll look 1 second.
Thanks. I want to make sure that when I'm doing my job.
I'll give you a 5-minute warning.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So I appreciate it. Take all the help I can get. So here's a couple questions. I'll put them together because of time, I think, a little bit. You've discussed some ideas that have been put on the table, last meeting, this meeting. Comprehensive plans, health and all policies, public engagement principles. With a sense of real worldness, given how much is there to do already, and I'm speaking for you and that, how do you think about this? There's no decision, it's not a decision-making forum tonight, you have your places to make decisions. But how do we think about if there is a priority, and maybe there's not, maybe they're all equally important, or maybe there's others we haven't talked about, but what's in your minds about how we think about what's important going forward of these things we've been talking about? What comes together for you in your own individual minds about this is where we ought to spend some time? And I apologize if that's not a clear framing, I'm trying. Just because, the different ideas we've talked about, is there something that pops up either because it's so important, or you ought to start there, or frame it any darn way you want to make it real for the realities of the county to go forward with anything, given everything else?
I think the criminal justice stuff that Lee was talking about, applying it there.
Say that, I missed the first part of that, I'm sorry.
The criminal justice reform work that we're doing.
Okay, all right.
It's just,
Right.
it calls out for it.
Brings a lot of things together in that one topic,
Yes.
many elements to it.
Some of what our efforts are going to be with that is an initial attempt to figure out how to keep people out of the criminal justice. And one of the things we've learned is that many people end up in the justice system because of health reasons. And this is something that can be addressed. Well, one of the issues to me that's really big and important is that in health, the state's basically Medicaid program, if people are required to make a monthly contribution to it, it is scaled. But should they somehow miss one, then they can't re-enroll for 6 months. This is something that pushes people right into jail, and their health conditions get worse. And it's something that we need to talk to the state about a whole lot. That's going to be an important part of it. oh dear, and there was another one that I wanted to bring up, but I can't think of it right now. So I'll bring it up later if I think.
It'll come to you for sure. Other thoughts on sort of going forward with one or more of these items we've talked about? Health comprehensive plans, health and all policies, kind of frameworks, resolutions even could be, public engagement principles. Yes, I see a hand. Peter.
Yeah, so I think the document that you shared out is really helpful in terms of understanding what are some of the best practices, what have other communities done that has worked that are similar to ours. And I think we get a lot of presentations as elected officials, and we get a lot of reports, and really clearly defining next steps and actionable items is really important. I think that's, in terms of the criminal justice study, one of the benefits of that is using the SIM model does lead us to having actionable steps that we can take. And I think that's really something that I think moving forward, we need to be really clear about is what are the possible steps, and something that Councilmember Munson was talking about, not just, what can we afford or what can't we afford, but what is possible, and really defining, prioritizing those as to what's first, what's second, what's third, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. Other thoughts about moving forward, including what CVHMC might be able, what we could provide, material information or something, if there is anything of that as well. That may come up later as well, not today, but. We have a funded project out here, is doing a bunch of work and wants to be a good partner and be supportive. Any thoughts about it? What about, I'll ask a question. What about public engagement principles? Will the county consider thinking about adopting some, I'll just ask it up front, asking some sort of public engagement principles as a way to guide department and county generally engagement work?
Sure.
For example, I mean,
there's a set.
Generally, yes, but
many communities around the country have sets of 10 to 20 broad public. They're not laws, they're not ordinances, they're guidance principles that get promulgated, usually with some public engagement to it. Say, what about these? And they become a guidance piece that departments use to help for their respective public engagement work across, good heavens, transportation, health, everything, land use. Oh my goodness, there's so many things, as you know. So they're just they're a framework. The help people who are planning public engagement say, okay, this is sort of, we pay attention to these things. This is good.
How do you operationalize it?
Well, that's a different, interesting question. Different people do it differently. Some people, as some communities, municipalities, as part of counties, cities, towns, whatever you have, put together a set of kind of measures for these things. That's rare. Fewer people do that. And they actually lay out, this is what it would look like. This is how you tell. Sometimes it becomes a responsibility. It's a job description piece. It fits in job descriptions for staff, saying, when you do these kind of things, attend to, language is language for everybody in their own job description, attend to our public engagement principles, and maybe when there's a review, someone asks a question, maybe. But there's different ways to do it. I think they're generally frameworks for people to understand, and they're educational pieces for the community as well. That okay, these are the things we care about public engagement. It creates sort of a template for thinking about public engagement, to plan it, and to help review it once it's done. It's a tool. It's a guidance tool, pretty much. And again, there's a good bunch of them, and many of them are listed either in the handbook that Stephanie has put together, Knowledge has put together for CVHMC. There's a public engagement handbook that contains some of that. the document that I keep waving around has some of the resources as well and links to other places that actually have them, and the links are there. So there's a range of them. Anyway, so other thoughts one way or another before we get ready to go back to small groups? Yes, Trent, I saw a hand there.
Well, I would just add that I think specifics, you know, how that happens, I think that's probably the hardest lift. It's sort of like if you say to any elected official, you know, don't you care about the environment? And they're all going to be like, of course I do. It's a matter of how we do that. Now, that said, I think that the sky's the limit. I mean, I'm looking at the screen right now, and we are, I believe, on TV right now with cats, or at least it's being recorded for somebody's public consumption. That's one step that we have done years ago. Our predecessors, early 70s or so, invested in that as a tool for people to watch their officials. I've been to other communities where I was surprised that I could not, you know, talk in public comment, A, or B, talk in public comment in a way on local public access television. So I think we've done a lot already that is a initial step for its time. But it's kind of figuring all those things out as you go. I sometimes giggle, you know, when I'm in the courthouse and I'll see a public notice that's like taped to the wall outside of a meeting. Well, that was the old form of public engagement. You know, you add in the other layers, and I think that it's figuring all that out in different ways. We have counselors that do town halls, et cetera. So I think it's a matter of figuring it all out, but we have a history with this, and certainly a commitment to doing it if you look at it.
Bet. A lot of public engagement by the county in many arenas happens right now. Yeah.
And I think it's using that as a launching point. I think it's important as well to continue to evolve new ways of engagement. So I was just reading about a new book that's out, Dream, Play, Build, Hands-on Community Involvement, which is really more specifically connected with things like planning and zoning, parks, and other things. But basically what it does is it brings people together in a room to work on a model together, what they want, what do you want to see on this blank slate? And you get different results than if you ask people the same question, what do you want? They will actually plan and build out what they want in a way that's even more creative than anything they would say. So I think we just have to always be as creative and flexible in whatever we do. I don't want us to get stuck on something and say, this is how we're going to do public engagement and that's it. Because we've seen, as Penny pointed out, we've seen the benefits of Zoom, even in a horrible environment of a pandemic, that has changed things. And so I think that we just need to keep evolving as society evolves. We can't come up with a list and stick with it. We need to come up with a list and improve on it.
Thank you. Other comments as we begin to get closer to the end of this particular segment of our meeting before joining back everyone. Other thoughts?
We have about 15 minutes left in the breakout room. So if anyone has
questions,
feel free to ask.
No, we have time.
No rush.
Very good. Oh, very good. Okay. Any other thoughts about next steps with any of these arenas, the things we're talking about? I mean, and I'm going to go back also to how CVHM's Community Voice for Health might be helpful. What information might be useful for you to have that you would like to have more of, perhaps even. You know where to find us. So let us know. I mean, the news may come up a little bit later. Think about it as well. But what about challenges? What about just challenges? Whether it's public engagement, whether it's, we've talked about some of this, but I always like to look at the challenges side of everything. The public engagement, health and all policies, comprehensive plans. But for counties to move in any of these things, what are among the challenges for doing this work in your mind?
Time and money.
Mhm. Yes, indeed.
I think it's also a challenge to make sure that we're hearing from everyone. And that's something no one's ever gotten right that I've seen. I've just never seen that work anywhere, where a governmental entity was able to hear from the folks at all parts of society, a diverse cross-section of society. It's never happened. And I don't know, outside of a town hall in Vermont, in a small town, how you would achieve that. Because I think that's our vision of democracy as residents in any community, but it's not what really happens. And so the people with the deepest pockets have the biggest voices, or whatever it may be, depending on what the issue is. But it's really, I don't think anyone's ever walked away from a public participation, and if they have, I can't imagine it, walked away from a public participation project and said, great, we heard from everybody. We heard from everybody we needed to. There are always more people we need to hear from. And that is, the biggest struggle. And it's interesting because part of what was discussed at these meetings, and these were occurring on Zoom for a while, Cheryl, before there was the in-person, was this issue of how do you participate, and how do we reach out to you to participate? And it's a huge question, and no one solved it as far as I know. And I don't know when we'll know that we have. I think that's a challenge. How do we know we've heard from everybody who has an opinion on something? So I think that's the biggest one.
Anyone else? The obstacles, staying with the obstacles side, the challenges side for a minute.
Let me go ahead and break the silence because I find it awkward.
I'm going to.
Oh, Cheryl, do you want to go ahead? I have some.
I was just searching. I was searching for my hand. So you go ahead, Peter. I'll follow you.
Okay. So I think one of the challenges that we have in the county right now is that we currently don't have a dashboard. And one of the things that we keep hearing from people is you need to have a better way of conveying data. And we always are coming up on this thing of like, okay, whose data? How often do we get that data out? Who gets to put that out? And, there's all these questions about the conveyance of data. The city had a system, they just went to a new system, and there was confusion about, how you get data from those different systems. And I think one of the challenges that we have as the county is, as Commissioner Githens was pointing out, we do so much good work. How do we convey that? How do we put that out there? And how do we build that trust with the people that Commissioner Thomas was talking about that we may not ever hear from? And how do we build those bridges to those folks? So data, how do we collect it? How do we collate it? How do we present it? Cheryl, was that long enough?
Sure.
Okay.
Were you going to add something, Cheryl, to that?
Actually, a different tack, and that is that we are very hampered in our ability to work with the public because the public doesn't understand local government. They don't understand state or federal government for the most part either. And our civic knowledge quotient is incredibly low. And it declined over time. It hasn't gotten better, it's declined. And this is not a job for Monroe County government or city government, but it's something that affects government because of our poor ability to communicate with the people that we serve.
This makes me think, I'm going to turn this around now a little bit. Just coming from what you're saying, because the obstacle side, and also every obstacle and challenge is an opportunity, I suppose. I haven't seen, there's a new, I think the Indiana Civic Health Index is out. I haven't seen the new latest one. So I can't, nothing to compare to the one in 2019 or whatever, around going to public meetings, I haven't seen it yet. But does what we're talking about suggest opportunities for addressing some of what the challenges that you're suggesting, you've described, Cheryl, public engagement, whether it's principles or, any of this work we're talking about, are these opportunities for addressing some of what is a lack of information or a lack of participation?
But this is where we run into things with the state level stuff, because they control the curriculum, basically.
They do.
In a lot of ways, that goes through the schools. I remember, I'm one of the older people present, we had government, quote unquote, that was very different. It was much more civics oriented than what is being taught in schools these days. So, yeah, I think this is where when we talk about the fact that we don't get to control some of the things that would make it easier to do this, or even possible to do some of this.
I collect old civics texts, so I'm particularly interested in this topic, but that's another matter. But what else, staying with this thought of also opportunities for a minute of what we're talking about, what Community Voice for Health have been talking about, some of these ideas with you about going forward, are these opportunities in some way for the county? I won't belabor the point.
Well, I think that there are opportunities around what we were just saying with the public not being well informed about what government does or how government operates, in that we could do more informational type of marketing almost. So I think, a couple years ago, Julie had the idea of, I think, of putting, just in front of our public meeting, we were going to do slides and the slides were going to say, hey, did you know that this is what county council does? And then, hey, here's what the commissioners do. And, and that's a kind of one way you could go about it. You could also be more active in social media and in addition to kind of the typical things, promote an event, talk about policy. We could say, hey, county council does this, or, because there's a lot, it's a lot. And it's not surprising to me at all that people don't know what we do. It's a lot to know.
I thought it would be great to even do some short video segments just to put on our website for each department so that folks can figure out what each department does. But that's also, that's also a barrier, that having to learn what you have to learn to get things done is a barrier that I hate to put in front of anybody, but it's, we didn't create the problem, so maybe we can help create a solution. Yeah, I'm thinking there's got to be some way that we can make this process less mystifying. And again, it's not a process we created. It's not a process that we think should be mystifying or difficult or full of speed bumps along the way. So there's got to be some things that we can do that will help overcome some of this, I hope. So we can be thinking about that.
Other comments? We must be just about out of time before we go. I think maybe 5 minutes, I think. Go back into large group.
Oh, my hand disappeared.
Oh yeah, well, I see your hand. I see you, I hear you, so you're on.
So, okay. So Terry, do you know about one of the very informative programs that help citizens learn about local government? You say you took the Citizens Academy for the city. Did you know that the county has one as well?
I've taken both. I took both.
Taken
when I
both.
moved here.
Good.
Yeah, I took both. It's through ICM, through IUP. Is it through IUPUI, the county?
Purdue.
No,
It's through Purdue.
Purdue.
Yeah.
It's Purdue Extension. Yeah.
Yeah,
Extension,
thank you.
yeah.
Purdue Extension. That's what it is. I can remember. Been a few years. I've done it.
And some of us have participated in this and helped teach that. And the people who attend like this, but there are not many attendees for, at least for the county. It's not widely known. And I hope that will continue. I hope it will get a boost. And now that Zoom is helpful in communicating and taking classes. But that's something that we in local government have participated in to help deal with the issues.
One way that sometimes is helpful, I was just randomly off of this more in my IU teaching job, not my CBHMC role here tonight, is it thinking about a resident or citizen. I'm not sure what the county's calling it now, whether it's resident or Citizens Academy. I think city moved to residents. I'm not sure about the county. But it's in a way, it's target marketing. I mean, you can, if it's y'all come, you'll tend to get the same folks. If you identify, here's who you're trying to, then you got there's a certain messaging and a certain amount of work and a certain amount of, intermediaries, maybe even to get folks. So there is some work there, but it makes me think just about any public engagement has that same element. That's why public engagement principles can be helpful. One of which talk about inclusion and equity and such. There's elements of this work that will help if it's front and center a little bit in terms of the strategies and the values. That's just my random personal thought only. But it is interesting though, I think the citizen and resident academies are a great way in for people often to learn more about county government. I certainly did. I'm from upstate New York originally, and it was closer in government type there than where I was after that out west. Anyway, other thoughts? Just any? Yes, Lee.
Well, it occurs to me coming back to going to where the people are.
Yeah.
Maybe Citizens Academy could become more useful if it were possibly a little more abbreviated and something that would be available to various groups to invite a Citizens Academy to come and talk to their group, which, could be churches, it could be various activist groups, all kinds of different groups. But that could be a way to take it outside of just the kind of central government arena.
We have about a minute left, so I'd like just to go around. Any last thought, takeaways anyone wishes to share about anything that's been said among you all tonight? Or thoughts to go forward, of course. Don't go away though, because we'll be in the whole group in a minute.
Okay.
Don't run off.
We have about 1 minute left in the breakout room.
Thank you. Well, think about how CVHMC can be useful, what information we might be able to provide for going forward. I think that's one very basic thing, I think. And if you have any problems assessing any information, or if it could be made more available in some way, let us know. Or if there's more that CVHMC can, within our own capacities, put together and be helpful with. let us know that as well.
It's an exciting grant. This is a great opportunity.
It's a good, we've learned a lot from the other, we're a little different here than some of the other funded initiatives around the country, sort of combining the public engagement.
Recording stopped.
There we go. I think we'll go back to group. Thanks for your participation.
Yeah, thanks for leading it.
Thanks, Terry.
Herding cats.
Pleasure to see you all.
You too, Terry.
This will be put back into other group, I imagine. There are forces at work. Look in the chat, see what's going on.
All right, I think we've got everybody at this point. Welcome back to the big room. I'm actually going to hand it over to Lisa Marie to lead a little discussion here.
Great.
Recording in progress.
Sorry.
That's okay. There we go. Thank you all so much for participating in these smaller breakout sessions. Really appreciate it. And now we have some time to sort of share amongst ourselves, maybe some insights from each of the groups. What light bulbs kind of went off for you tonight? Perhaps new perspectives, new ways of thinking about things for moving forward to advance inclusive public engagement in health issues. So anyone who'd like to jump in? Some moments of insight. Assuming there were some, of course. Yes, Sue, thank you.
I think I think we have lovely consensus around the notion that it's really hard, okay, to have public input. But I guess for me, that kind of speaks to the need for, there is no substitute for persistence. I had a colleague once upon a time who was on council several years ago who said, yeah, I held a constituent meeting once and no one came, so I never held another one. And I think that's not why we do this. I mean, that's not, you don't just get to listen once. Whatever efforts we come up with, whatever ideas we have about being inclusive are, at the end of the day, without persistence, they don't mean much. So that's kind of what's percolating for me.
Other thoughts? And if it wasn't a light bulb moment, maybe it was a grappling moment, getting your head to think about it in, that kind of way.
Well, I'll just share what I said with the city group is that I have no idea what the Monroe County Health Department long-term plan is, I'm not sure what their jurisdiction is, what they do. I mean, we've heard a lot about them because of the pandemic, but I really feel like as a city council member, I'd like to learn more how the city can work together on health issues with the county. We don't have a health department, but there's still things we could do that are complementary, maybe. So that was kind of a moment for me. It's like, I don't know what the heck you guys do.
think we talked about how most people don't know what the heck we do generally. So that tracks.
I'll add to what Sue was talking about. In addition to persistence, I think we talked a lot about creativity and trying to meet people where they're at instead of assuming they're going to come to a meeting.
One thing I'd add to that is the extent and the format and the depth that health and all policies and public engagement can take in various forms. What does that look like beyond us planning, et cetera, into our departments? What multitude of forms does that take beyond just people in a meeting or something written on a plan?
Any other thoughts of things that bubbled up from your conversation? I know you covered a lot. I know it's Monday and it's late. And those of you who had kids running around all day. So we really appreciate you all being here.
I'll go. I think in respect to on the county side, what we were talking about in regards to public engagement, there was some things that were thrown out about the formality and the way that we engage people, having a very structured type of thing, and how that may work and how that might not work in order to get the new people to be involved as well. Because it was often said during our conversation that we have our meetings and we have we ask the general public to come out, but it typically seems to be that it's the same type of, or the same faces that we continue to see in these meetings. And how do we, in respect to meet, or what we had talked about of reaching people where they are and going to people where they are. We also talked about people are just burnt out with lots of different things, kids running around. The pandemic has just had us all fatigued. So how do we get those new faces into the fold to be a part of the community engagement and conversation as well? But also with that, what is the end game? Because again, we talked about when you have a fatigue, there's sorts of like all different types of fatigue, but people want to be involved and they want to be a part of the process, but I think they also want to know what is the end game? How do they play a factor into this? And what is the plan that we can do moving forward? And I think we can all say that that's what we would like to see, because oftentimes we have these kind of conversations and we can talk until we're blue in the face, but what does that do? What is, again, the end game? And I'm not just saying that because I'm a Marvel person, but what is the goal? What is the end game? So
thank you. Okay, just another minute or so. Anything else lingering or anything else missing that we can think about moving forward? And we'll wrap up. Okay, I'm doing my nonverbal scan. Everybody looks pretty set. I think I'll just thank you all again so much. You talk about bringing people to the table, and I know it requires like setting the table, right? So you all are doing so much work to set things up for community connections, and really appreciate everything you do for the city and the county and our larger community. So it's been really an honor to talk with you all tonight and to be together. So thanks for your time, and I'll pass it over to Liz. So thanks.
Oops. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming. And kind of right now, so I kind of pop back and forth into the two groups. And sort of some next steps is that we need to really kind of look at all the feedback and kinds of ideas that you shared with us to begin to identify, I think, for the project and for the work that we're all sort of working on together, what some next steps might be, what sort of resources. I heard in both groups a lot of questions and more than probably solutions, but really, really good questions. So right now, I just want to let you all know that we're going to take a look at all this information. We're going to be summarizing it. We'll be sharing it back out. We may be doing, we were thinking possibly about having some follow-up conversations with each of you, maybe by phone or Zoom, and to really begin to think about what those next steps might look like. And so I'm just going to kind of leave it there. And again, thank you so much for your time, and have a good evening, everybody, and looking forward to thinking more. So thanks.
As always, let us know if you have questions.